This is the word of the Lord.
Well, who doesn't like a good fishing story? And this is a fishing story. In fact, the part about the teaching the crowds really is just a setup for the main point. And even the crowd, in one sense, is an aspect of what it means when Jesus refers to going fishing. And the story obviously concludes with a redefining for the fishermen of their calling in life and where they're going next. First thing to bear in mind here, of course, is the nature of the process of fishing that these fishermen were engaged in. For a long time, my only real concept of fishing was a solitary person with one of those long rods, and you flick it out and away you go and you reel it in. Or indeed, you could have a hand line, I think a little circle that held, throw it out by the wharf, whatever. Whether all on your own or in a clump of other people who are fishing with you, like I often see down by the harbour there, this is a really very individual kind of fishing, almost a kind of competition with the others who are fishing and a competition with the fish. Mono a mono, trying to outsmart the fish and reel it in and get it and all that sort of stuff. But the fishermen of Jesus' day didn't use rods. They used nets. They hurled the nets into the sea, and a team would draw the nets in and they would capture the fish that fell under the influence of those nets. One person simply could not do it, or certainly not as effectively, on their own. This kind of fishing is a coordinated team effort. And I have to be honest, I don't really know much about fishing, much less this kind of fishing, but it would make sense to me, for example, that someone on the team might be particularly good at knowing where the fish are likely to be. They might just have really good sense about that. There might be someone else who was excellent at throwing the net. Maybe there was somebody else there who was very good, very strong, and could move to the part of the net where it was heaviest to help bring it in. Perhaps there was somebody else on the team who was just really good at coordinating all the other members. I don't know. I'm making that bit up. But they worked as a team to achieve the best outcome for everyone. No doubt each team of fishermen found their most effective configuration, but the point is they wouldn't do it, or they really couldn't do it as effectively on their own. This is all about multiplying the result by coordinating their efforts. And when it comes to being fishers of people, as Jesus then introduces to Simon, there are some actual parallels that Jesus intends us to be aware of, I think. And the first thing is the team effort part. The most effective forms of sharing the message of Jesus' kingdom are generally shared community experiences. This is because the very essence of God's kingdom is community. It's all about how we do life together. Even the notion of the net, drawing the fish together, conveys something of that sense of drawing together in a new community, a new way of being together. And before you object to the notion of being held captive by a net, and I'll say more about the net in a moment, at this stage it's enough to acknowledge effective human life only ever occurs within the context of a living network. That's the reality. There are no individual human beings in nature. Doesn't happen. We are born into families. Humans have always lived in tribes and communities and societies. Left genuinely on our own, and it's hard to be left genuinely on your own in our society today because we're upheld by so many things that we don't even think about anymore, from reticulated water to Wi-Fi to electricity, whatever it might be. But left genuinely on our own, we will not survive. We will most certainly die out. So the art and ministry of bringing people together in ways that help each one to live better together is a life-sustaining thing. And we are doomed without it, because even in groups of humans, if we don't work out how to live together, our track record is that we consistently will destroy each other. Now, there's a lovely little dynamic in this story. I really like this touch. The story is written to make sure that we don't miss it. Jesus, the preacher, tells Simon, the fisherman, how he should do his job. It's a lovely little touch, really. And the story deliberately contains Simon's subtle yet very clear and obvious pushback. Verse 5, Simon answers, "Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing. But I will do as you say, and the nets we've just cleaned, we'll go and pop them back in the water as you wish." And we're meant to feel the exasperation in Simon's reluctant willingness. I was trying to think of an example if I've ever experienced something similar to that, and I think the most regular experience of it is when I'm trying to work out some new technology. I struggle with the thing for ages, trying to get it to work and do what it's supposed to, and then Pay, my 15-year-old daughter, comes up and says, "Why don't you do this, Dad?" And I look at her and I think, I've already done that several times. Yet somehow with Pay's guidance, the doing of this seems to magically work. Now, this has happened so often now that I tend to just follow Pay's guidance without objection and see what happens. And I don't really consider her to be a miracle worker. It's simply that she's more familiar with more technology than I am. And so she has intuitions about it, things that are a bit strange to me, and why would they do it that way, and how does that go there? She just she knows it. Jesus appears to know things that cut across the accepted wisdom and ways. It was completely understandable that after doing their best all day, Simon and his team would have assessed that it was time to give it a break, just for now at least. I can hear in Simon's response the same frustration that I natively have towards my clever 15-year-old. "What are you talking about, Jesus? Do you think we're idiots? We've just been doing exactly what you said." Yet as an act of reluctant respect, Simon obeys this otherwise seemingly inane directive of Jesus. And in a way reminiscent of Pay's insight in the technological area that I can't fathom, the result is extraordinary. It would seem that Jesus knew something even the seasoned professional did not. And here we encounter a social phenomenon that cuts in more than one direction, in a sense, because traditional wisdom is based on all that which has proven over time to be most helpful. That's the reason it was adopted as tradition in the first place. And to be honest, the superpower that has driven human development is that we are very good at learning from and copying and then further developing that which has been most successful. That's how we have propelled our development. We are both held by and then propelled by our traditions. When a new tradition subverts and perhaps even comes to eclipse or replace an older tradition, it would be very wise to understand as fully as possible what it is we are letting go of and what it is we are taking hold of in its place. In the last several hundred years, Western culture has experienced a steady supplanting of the religious cultures that have given rise to our society. The steady trajectory of secular scientific discovery and technological development has subtly at first, but in a more overt and high-handed way as time has gone on, dislodged the notion that there are any true mysteries at all. Now, I'm not saying that technology is a bad thing. I love it. I've got the latest iPhones and whatever else. It's just that something happens in our thinking as we get cleverer, and we think we can just work out anything and everything. What was once called mystery is now considered merely stuff we're yet to discover or analyse properly and then to fully understand. However, there are mysteries that science and technology are not well suited to understanding. For example, if someone were to claim to have discovered the science of love, I would not doubt that they might have discovered and even been able to map in some helpful way a certain set of human interactions and relations, but that would not be love. In love, there is free will, a sovereign self-giving that is the heart of love. It can neither be predetermined, you can't map it out and go, oh, that person's going to love that person or whatever else it might be, and neither can it be manipulated from someone. It's much like the wind in a sense that you feel its power, you can observe its impact, but you cannot actually see it or do a study on it, I don't think. Which is why the new fishing task that Jesus gives to Simon is by no means as simple as throwing a net into the sea. The first thing about the language used here by Jesus is that he makes use of a common term that is different from the idea of hunting, like going after something in order to kill it as your prey. The idea of fishing has in it a notion of catching alive. And the object here is not for the catcher to feed on those who have been caught. It's not a matter of power over or domination over, such that the caught are a resource for those who caught them. When it comes to preaching the gospel, we might think that much is really obvious. A preacher isn't going to feed on those who come under the preacher's influence, are they? And yet, in recent history, there are just far too many examples, I think, of particular evangelists or other religious figures who have actually taken advantage of those under their care. And it is, in fact, way too easy for any person in a position of responsibility or authority to deliberately or inadvertently use their power to benefit themselves at the expense of those who look to them for leadership. And Jesus wants his followers to hold together as a renewed community those who come under their influence, not to feed off them. And now to the part about being caught in a net. This is not about being held against our will. Jesus is referring to a kind of being caught up that amounts to the same dynamic that brought the crowds to the lakeside to hear him teach. They were not compelled by external forces, they were drawn by their curiosity, their hope, their own desire. I remember when I turned 18 and I began to go to the pub on a Friday night after work. It was the thing to do among most of my peers at the time, and I have to be honest, it never really did that much for me. In fact, I'd generally get a single beer at the start of the night and sit on it pretty much the whole time and just pretend to be a bit drunk, like all my mates. I mean, I had no desire to lose control of my own faculties or experience a hangover the next day, let alone whittle away my hard-earned cash on beer. So when my mum suggested that we take a look at the local church, I was more than a little interested, and I like to tell people that I saw the lovely young ladies there and they caught my attention, and that was certainly true. But if I'm honest, I was also looking for something more. No one said I had to go to church. It was in contrast to my earlier experience of having to go through bar mitzvah in the synagogue. I had to do that. That was part of a family expectation. In fact, the story was, once you had your bar mitzvah, then you could make your choice whether you wanted to keep going to synagogue or not. And I didn't want to, so I didn't. But church I started going to because I was interested. I wanted to. And I kind of got roped in by the stories of Jesus, the sound of what he was teaching, and the shape of the way that Jesus did life with his community. See, this is the only legitimate net we have to use. We're not to use intimidation or any other forms of manipulation, no fear tactics, not deception or playing on the gullibility of the average punter. This network is always and only an invitation. It is offered freely and openly. The only healthy response to Jesus is one that comes equally freely, motivated by the genuine desire of the one making the response. In the end, it is not possible to cajole or coerce or manipulate anyone into God's kingdom, but we can help people become hungry for the life of the kingdom. And we kind of do this by being hungry for the life of the kingdom ourselves. I've become acutely aware recently, speaking with more and more people who are not involved with the church, just how many have a hunger. There are all manner of attempts to fill this hunger, and more often than not, it's not filled with very satisfying things, a little bit like eating sweets when what you really need is a hearty meal. Hunger might get dulled a little bit, but it's not filled up. And more people are awakening to their abiding hunger. There is an emerging dissatisfaction with what the world has to offer. And when a person who is aware of their own hunger meets someone whose life is being nourished by the grace of God, and the spiritually hungry person is able to observe the lived example of a nourished disciple, it can cause the hungry person to desire the reality that they observe in the disciple. Does that seem likely to you? Because I'm telling you it's true. I suspect there's a bit of a challenge here for us, those of us who count ourselves as disciples of Jesus. In what ways do we live differently to those who trust the systems and priorities of this world's cultures? Even as we join in with others and participate in society actively in all sorts of ways, in what ways do we do life differently to anyone who is not compelled by the kingdom priorities that Jesus demonstrates? And I don't ask the question to engender a sense of guilt, because discipleship is never a matter of being good enough or indeed getting it right or perfect or anything like that. We are always only saved by grace. But the question is a helpful diagnostic question that can enable us to see ourselves more clearly and thereby be more honest with ourselves about what we actually put our trust in. Because where we place our trust is the clearest indicator of what we believe. When we believe in something, people around us become aware of it, whether we like it or not, although we can be good at hiding, but just like we become aware of other people's beliefs when we are in their company in all sorts of subtle and sometimes not as subtle ways. It's not so much about what is said about religion, or indeed the lack of religion or anything like that. It's much more the lived priorities, the way we relate to one another. Things get noticed. Care is shown. Kindness can be expressed in a range of ways. And it's mostly very, very subtle and largely hidden, because real care is never a showpiece. We don't go, ta-da, I'm just caring for someone here, I hope you notice. That's not care, that's something else. When you really care for someone, almost nobody will openly notice, and everybody will know something, because it touches a very deep place in our community interaction. In the end, what matters most is who we are as a community being transformed by the grace of Christ. The reality of Christ's work in us and through us is experienced tangibly by all who come into our orbit. And I think Anne and Phil might be happy to testify to that reality gladly. And we've really enjoyed having them as part of that for 3 months. Next time we will have to stay longer. There will be people who, as a result of their engagement with us, become aware of their hunger. They will be drawn in by the compelling nature of the person of Jesus, who is central to our life together and who they inadvertently meet as a result of being with us. And the more that we transfer our trust from the ways of the world to the ways of Christ, the more compelling will be our presence in this community and the eloquence of our message to the world that Jesus is alive and with us. Let us continue to give ourselves fully to this because it is our calling. We are fishers of people to the glory of God. Let us pray. Lord, we thank you that you call us to this eternal and life-giving work. We thank you that we're not out to consume anybody or manipulate anybody, but to invite them into a life that is so rich and so well worth living. May your love flow in us and through us, transforming this local community and transforming the world to the glory of your name. Amen.